I lose my chain of thought, or I'm unable to focus or concentrate, or you've told me so many things but I have no idea what they are. Like, I was really trying to listen, but it's an absolute blur for me. I couldn't repeat a single one of them back to you, and that's kind of what people term as brain fog.
If someone is facing chronic stress, how do they begin to identify the fact that they have chronic stress in the first place?
It's all so gradual that it's so easy to miss. Yeah, it builds up so slowly, and so things like any kind of change in your kind of appetite, your sleep, your mood, your memory or focus or concentration, as frequently as people come up with this concern, it's very well ignored.
Stress is a very commonly used word. In fact, it's so commonly used that unfortunately we've forgotten what it can do to us and the long-lasting impact that stress can have. On today's podcast, we have Urvez, a counseling psychologist, and we are going to decode stress. Urvez, stress is such a common word today. Every other person is using the word stress, and honestly, I use it unknowingly so many times. But I somewhere feel like words like stress or overthinking or burnout aren't given the kind of importance that they should, because people don't know what they can do to our bodies when they become chronic. So from you, who's a psychologist, I want to kind of first start by understanding what stress really means from a scientific and like a psychological perspective.
Yeah, you're right. We use it so frequently, and I think at least once a week, most of us will use the word stress in some or the other context, right? And it's not that we always use it inaccurately, because if you think about it, stress is a normal, regular response. It's a human response to any stressor, okay? And there's a lot of changes that happen when we're stressed or when we face a stressor, and we'll go more into that as we go along. But it's a natural human response. So of course we're going to talk about it because there are a lot of stressors, and therefore we experience stress. Yeah. The magnitude of changes that occur depends on the level of the stressor, what kind of stressor it is, the frequency of the stressor, etc. Yeah. So if you talk about just maybe smaller stressor, say I had to just come here to shoot this episode, right? And I was trying to book a cab and it wasn't getting booked. It's the afternoon time. So I experienced a little bit of stress. That was a stressor. Yeah, I had a goal. I was getting blocked. So I experienced some stress. Yeah. Did my heart rate suddenly shoot up? Was I having like panic-like symptoms? Was I unable to function? No, because the level of the stressor wasn't such.
Yeah.
And my perception of the stressor wasn't so high. Yeah. So perception of stressor is also another important factor when we're talking about our response to stress. Yeah. Someone else might have had a lot of stress and a greater stress response if they were unable to maybe get somewhere on time. Maybe it's an interview, so it's, slightly more important. So maybe they would get more distressed by it. Yeah. Distress is an important factor here, because a lot of other stressors might actually be like good stress in a sense. Yeah. So just before we started filming, maybe I also felt a little bit something in my tummy. Maybe you did too. Maybe you do every time. And that's what we call eustress, E-U-S-T-R-E-S-S. Yeah, which is good stress. It helps us to get into a good frame of mind, a good kind of, sense in our body that makes us ready to deal with something that's going to come up. Yeah. And that's important, because if I don't feel that, slight level of interest, excitement, not going to do my best,
Correct.
you know. We're not going to be able to perform the way we want.
Yes.
Even, you know, we might experience this while we're packing for a holiday that we're really excited about. That's good stress, and sometimes we get really jittery about it as well. But again, that's eustress, yeah. So mostly when we use the word stress in daily life, we're usually referring to distress, which is the not so great stress.
And what you said was so interesting, right? Like, for example, this podcast. I was a little stressed because I care and because I wanted to go right. You were similarly a little stressed because you wanted to go right. But now there is a fine line between that sort of nervous, excited kind of stress and then to the point where it gets super bad. And that is also eventually, I think, what people say is chronic stress. So now how does this sort of good normal stress without us knowing can sometimes become chronic for certain people?
Yeah, great question. I think this is a good distinction to make at this point. So the examples that I gave were what we put under acute stressors, which means they're not necessarily small, but they're relatively short term.
Yeah.
Yeah. And once you kind of deal with them, the stress that you feel kind of goes away, right? And you kind of go back to your body's natural, normal functioning, which we call as homeostasis.
Yeah.
Now, say other kind of stressors which don't, fall back, right? They kind of just keep going, keep going, keep going. Those are kind of what we call chronic stress. Yeah. Chronic stressors, and then we experience chronic stress. So it's more long term, it's more sustained. You don't get that kind of pause to allow your body to just go back into its normal rhythm. Yeah. And what's happening on our body level is when we experience a stressor and we have a stress response, there are hormones in our body. There's brain chemicals like cortisol, very frequently related with stress, very important in the stress response. Adrenaline, which, we describe as our fight or flight response, right? So these two kind of spike, and in the previous examples, the acute stressors, once we're dealing with the stress, they go back down. Yeah. And that's when your body kind of regulates. Other hormones and neurotransmitters, brain chemicals take over to kind of just regulate everything. But when the stressor is consistent, say there are issues going on in someone's family, in someone's home, frequently we see in our culture, especially in the context of, say, arranged marriages, and then, say, the girl has gone to the husband's house to stay with the parents, sometimes even extended family. So essentially when she's gone into the joint family and there's so much adjustment, and say there are a lot of issues, that's just like day-to-day chronic stress. Yeah. So initially she might be quite enthusiastic essentially about, okay, you know what, I'm going to cope with this. I'm going to learn how to deal with these people. Yes, it's an adjustment, but I'm going to, maybe create change in them or myself, or, whatever their mindset is. And they might be like, on the go about it. And that's, that what we call the optimal zone of dealing with stress. Yeah. But say nothing changes, right? And say that stressor goes on and on. Maybe things get worse. New things keep coming up. Now her body is in a constant state of stress for a long period of time. Yeah. Now, when that happens, the body and brain are connected, as we can see. So it's going to have an effect on how she starts thinking then, right? Because she's no more going to be, oh, let's do something about it. She's going to start getting really, really tired, right? Exhausted. And eventually, yes, maybe burnt out, right? And burnout is a chronic stress response, right? It's a symptom, it's a response. It's not something you have to solve. You can't solve burnout. You have to deal with the stress that's underneath it. Yeah. So that's how it kind of becomes long-term, chronic. Yeah. And a lot of other things happen as well. It's not just our body's response. Now, if you imagine if there's so much cortisol, adrenaline constantly surging, pumping in your brain, in your body, it's going to lead to inflammation, right? So those aches and pains that we sometimes feel, which go unexplained,
Yeah.
they are very well explained. We just refuse to accept that stress can do that to us.
Right.
Yeah. Skin rashes, a lot of skin problems, talk to any skin specialist. And especially when I bring up this question, they're like, yes, yes, stress contributes to a lot of skin issues, right? They're like, oh, finally someone gets it.
Yeah.
And that's another stress
Also, maybe
response.
gaining weight, losing weight can also.
Absolutely, absolutely. And that can be due to stress. And also that could be related to other behavioral responses of stress, which might be that I might be eating more
Yeah.
or eating less, right? And that could lead to losing weight as well. I could be using substances, alcohol, other illicit drugs to kind of deal with the stress, but not a good sustainable way of it. And again, that's going to impact your body in other ways, right? And then that's what creates cycles, right? When you're stressed, you're engaging in these behaviors. These behaviors are not helping deal with the bodily stress and the cognitive stress. So you're more stressed, So even as simple as, say, muscle aches and pains, right? And seemingly, like I said, unexplained. Then you get stressed about them, saying, why are they happening, right? I've gotten tests done, I've gotten x-rays, MRIs, I've gone to the physiotherapist, I've gone to orthopedics, etc., etc. It's not going away. Something must be wrong in my body, and we're building up that stress. Guess what happens when you're stressed?
Yeah.
You have more aches and pains.
Yeah.
You see.
And unfortunately, the issue is that maybe we don't know when to identify it and then when to treat it. And as you said, right, some people end up eating more or resorting to, say, alcohol. And it reminds me of this very beautiful scene in a movie, Dil Dhadakne Do, wherein Shefali Shah's character, because she's really stressed, because a certain thing happens, she ends up eating a lot of cake. And they have shown that scene, I would say, in a beautifully heartbreaking sort of a way. But it clearly shows us that sometimes, unfortunately, we end up eating a lot when we're stressed, eating sweets when we're stressed, resorting to alcohol when we're stressed.
Yeah.
Why does that really happen? Because I often fail to understand how is that connected.
Yeah. I like you said, unfortunately, and a great word to put in that sentence is unwittingly, right? Unwittingly, we make our stress worse. Yeah, by engaging in maybe such behaviors and other ways as well. And I mean, they're easy, seemingly easy short-term fixes, right? I mean, would you rather put on your sports shoes and go for a run?
Correct.
Right. Or would you rather, eat a bunch of cake or have a drink? Yeah, one of them is easier, right? And we have to bring this up, scrolling.
Yeah.
So much easier than anything else, right? Even easier than opening a packet of chips or something. Yeah. And that again becomes a kind of go-to, trying to cope with it, but again, not helping because we're not addressing the root of the problem, right? And in that way, we unwittingly worsen the stress by leaps and bounds, right? We also, tend to withdraw socially when we're stressed, unfortunately. And again, unwittingly increase the stress because then we're, getting up more in our minds, and, that might actually cause social distance between, like not physical, but like literally social, from like our support system, who could actually help us cope with stress, not as in remove the stressors, but, again, just talking about it and things could really be helpful. They might offer perspectives. They might just simply listen. They might yell at us sometimes, they will like, just get over this.
Yeah.
And yes, that's probably not going to help with the stress itself, but sometimes it just helps to talk to people, right? And again, then it's going to become worse when we're not being able to reach out to people because of stress. We get more stressed, and there's just a lot of stress cycles, and they're all interconnected. Yeah, they all influence each other. So we scroll on social media thinking, oh, social media, but, talk to someone instead. Yeah. So it's just a lot of unwitting behaviors that worsen our stress, unfortunately.
And you're using the word stressors a lot, right? I want to go deep into that. What are these different kind of stressors and how are they worse than we even possibly can imagine?
Great question. So we could have our day-to-day situational stressors, like the ones we talked about at the beginning, right? It could then be other kind of stressors are more family or culturally related, more systemic and structural stressors. For example, poverty, unable to access education, healthcare,
Yeah.
just marginalization of various communities, identities, etc. And now those are stressors which are so much harder to action on as an individual, right? It needs community movement, it needs advocacy, it needs so much more. And it's not happening. And when you're in that position, when you're experiencing those stressors, it's very easy to feel hopeless and it's very hard to say, oh, let's do something about it, because you're seeing the inaction, you're seeing the apathy, and you're at a loss then. Yeah. So these different kinds of stressors are really important to talk about. We don't frequently break those down, right? And sometimes when we do that in therapy, it seems crazy helpful, because these people, our clients, realize that, oh, hold on, this is not a me problem. It's not about my ability to deal with stress, right? Because the best of the lot might come and say, I want to deal better with stress. I want to be more resilient. I need to learn coping skills and strategies. Like, yes, that's great. Let's do that. And we need to acknowledge that a lot of these stressors are outside and affecting us, but you cannot change them alone.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not saying they'll never change. They can change and we need to change them. But it's still very glaringly obvious that not enough is being done about it. Yeah, and just that acknowledgement of, okay, there's certain things that I need to work on, great, and those are going to help me. And then there are those other things that I just need to acknowledge exist.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I need to say, yes, this exists, this affects me. And
for example, as you said, right, there are a lot of external factors and sometimes we can't do anything about it, but we want to change those things because we feel, okay, once we change that, then everything will be fine, but sometimes we can't. Like, for example, say there are people that come from families wherein they don't have a very good bond because the family hasn't treated them very well, discrimination, many things. Even at work, sometimes when you go for work, you have a team that doesn't treat you well, but you cannot afford to lose that job. Now, how do we stay in that situation but still try and remove that stress by trying ourselves, because we can't change anything around us? So how do we draw that line? Because it's so difficult.
It's really difficult. And I think there's a great amount of privilege that goes into being able to say, oh, this environment isn't suiting me, so I'm going to move out.
Yeah.
Whether it's work, whether it's family, whether it's anything. Yeah. I think we need to acknowledge it's very easy to say, oh, but then just leave. But it doesn't work like that.
Yeah.
And I think that's really important, because that doesn't mean you can't do anything about it. It means that we'll do something about it, and that's where the psychological work of therapy comes in. And there might be limits to what you can do, right? So I think both those things coexist. And the work we do in therapy does have a lot to do. So I'm an REBT therapist, Rational Emotive Behavior Therapist. And what we do in REBT is that we acknowledge that the adversities around us, even if we can change them, let's leave them be for the time being. That's our stance on it, right? Because it's not just the existence of adversities that upset us or distress us, but it's our attitude and beliefs about them. Yeah. So that's where the work of therapy lies. With an REBT therapist, different therapists might function differently and have different ways of dealing with it. But in REBT, we'll try and work on our attitudes and beliefs about the adversities that exist. Yeah. Mainly what we try and do is we move from rigid, demanding beliefs to more flexible, non-rigid, non-demanding beliefs and attitudes. Yeah. What that might sound like is, the work example that you were giving, say there is like a hostile environment with colleagues, with the boss, and if I'm highly distressed about it, it might be likely that my attitude is something like, it's unfair, they should not treat me like this, it's unacceptable, I can't deal with it. Yeah. And also maybe start questioning yourself in terms of, does this really mean that I'm not good at my work or I'm incapable, etc. Yeah. And what we'll work on is moving towards that flexible belief of, look, yes, it's unfair. And I wish it wasn't happening, right? Obviously, that would help a lot. But yet, it could exist. It can happen as it's happening. And, the fine line of, I can deal with it. Yeah. But is it worth it for me to deal with it? Right? And yes, our privilege comes in there. But if it is worth it to deal with it, say I'm privileged, say I can do without this job, but I think this is a really important stepping stone to get where I want to go next. Yeah. So regardless of the fact that I can do it, I might still say, look, I want to deal with it. And that I'll only get to if I say, look, it can exist, though I wish it didn't. Do you see? As soon as I moved away from the rigidity, I say, oh, hold on, wait, I actually want to do this, right? However shitty it is, I'm going to cope because it's going to get me get to where I want to go. Yeah. This is not to propagate mistreatment of any kind, abuse of any kind, none of that. Yeah. So that reality check has to exist in therapy, outside of therapy, everywhere, whether it's at a workplace, whether it's at a family, etc. Yeah. But that line is going to be something that you decide and draw. Yeah. But once you choose that you're going to get in there, deal with it, and, just because it's worth it for me to do so, okay. And then you're also able to move away from that self-questioning and self-depreciation of incapable, etc. You realize that, oh, this is more to do with them than me. Yeah, I know my capabilities. I'm going to work on this. I'm going to where I want to go. Yeah. And I'll leave them behind eventually.
And how do you really deal with your patients who actually are incredibly stressed and have chronic stress, but they don't even know that all the issues that they are facing stem from stress? How do you deal with that?
Yeah, I think helping them see that is changing in a big way and really, really important. And I think just a couple of months ago, I did have a client who came in and listed out a host of things she's dealing with and stressors that I would really call stressors. And she's like, but why is this happening? And, I have like these bodily symptoms and I'm getting ill so often. And, I just can't focus at work and I can't concentrate. I feel so detached. And these are all like the cognitive symptoms of chronic stress and burnout as well, right? That I feel so detached. I'm unable to even think clearly, right? I keep maybe losing my chain of thought. I feel like my memory is gone to absolute dirt. And, this is obviously a change from what they would experience before. And they list out all of this and say, why is this happening? What do I do? Is something wrong with me? And, I'm sometimes flabbergasted. I'm like, no, it is not. And they're like, then what is it, right? And I have to explain to them that this is chronic stress that you're experiencing. And yes, you're very much maybe burnt out. Yeah. Burnout is usually more specific to like work burnout sometimes or, caregiver burnout. But it occurs after chronic stress as well, right? Just in a specific aspect. But chronic stress can be more global in a sense, not just affecting a particular thing.
And if someone is facing chronic stress, how do they begin to identify the fact that they have chronic stress in the first place?
Great Great question. So this is actually, so the things I'm going to talk about now are just red flags for you to say, look, something is wrong. Yeah, it might be stress, it might be something else.
Yeah.
But it is, you do need to pay attention to this. And I think we need to realize that these things don't pop up one morning and say, hi, today I don't feel like eating.
Yeah.
It doesn't work that way, right? It's all so gradual that it's so easy to miss. Yeah, it builds up so slowly. And so things like any kind of change in your kind of appetite, your sleep, your mood, yeah, your memory or focus or concentration, as frequently as people come up with this concern, it's very well ignored. Like, oh, this though happens only.
Yeah.
I don't know what's happening, it happens. And so frequently we all talk about it, but we don't pay attention to it, right? Like we see it, but we say,
We ignore it.
kind of. Yeah. I don't know if we ignore it, but we also don't look at it enough.
Yeah.
It's just there. You know, it's just there. It's somewhere.
Yeah.
We see it. It's there. We're like, cool, chill. Yeah, but we need to look at it. Yeah. Any kind of even bodily distress, which is not getting explained by other factors. Yeah. We need to look at it, right? We need to say, look, this might be related to something psychological. And that's what we also refer to as psychosomatic symptoms.
Okay.
Yeah. So like I said, like muscle aches and pains, for example, rashes, they're not always psychosomatic, okay? But sometimes they are. And psychosomatic simply refers to like more cognitive distress, which gets, it kind of shows up in physiological forms. Yeah, therefore somatic. Somatic is like more body related. Yeah, so it shows up in the body. More severe kind of symptoms are, you know, when I'm feeling like, wait, like when I'm questioning myself, questioning my worth, questioning, wait, what's the point of even being alive? So in kind of suicidal ideation, and so on. Very important, much more serious symptoms. And I think that's when people like, wait, hold on, there's something really wrong. Yeah. But again, coming back to the more gentler end of the spectrum, the more gentler changes that happen, it's just simply even in our thought processes. Yeah. We feel like, wait, why am I thinking like this, right? And sometimes our family or friends might say, wait, like, what do you mean? Like, this is new for you, right? Why did you think that when I said this, right? Yeah. And these are like those tiny subtle things. I'm like, wait, I don't know. I really thought you meant that. Yeah. So just again, seeing that and being able to say, look, I think this needs to be looked at. It might be nothing. Great, move on with your life. But if it is, nip it in the bud.
And do you think somewhere anxiety or more sort of serious issues like depression can stem from chronic stress that isn't treated?
So this is a little complex because they're interrelated systems. Okay. Our biology is important. Whatever's going on in our minds is important, and also what's going on around us is important, right? So recently, I had a client ask me. He had developed what is called obsessive compulsive disorder, where he was fixated on, he had repetitive ruminative thoughts about a certain event of his life and he was unable to let go of them. It was all consuming. And he said, you know, this happened 2 years ago, that episode that he was now fixating about. He said, this happened 2 years ago. Why didn't this happen? Why didn't I get this OCD then or in all this time? Why now? Yeah. So I had to explain to him that, look, all this while, maybe your environment as well as your biology were not giving a push to these symptoms. Yeah. So yes, the episode existed, right? The adversity might have existed, but maybe at this time what happened was there was some imbalance of neurotransmitters or hormones that happened, which allowed these symptoms to show up. Yeah. There was something different going on in his environment as well. And I explained to him that this didn't exist for these last 2 years. This is a very now problem, right? And that also then influences our body, which might have led to the change in brain chemicals that then caused the symptoms. Yeah. So it's really complex, and it's all interrelated. That's what's really important. Yeah. It's not pinpointing saying this caused it or this caused it. Possibly everything came together to cause it at this point in time.
Yeah, because our mind is pretty complex.
Yeah, and our body is,
Yeah.
right? It's all, and the environment. Yeah, it's constantly changing and not changing enough, right? There's so many factors, right? I think that's why it's complex. There's just too many factors. And if you think about it, you are this point, right, at an intersection of all these factors, right? And today you're at this intersection, which might have caused the chronic stress or symptoms or a diagnosable disorder eventually. And at another point in time, you were at a different intersection. Yeah, maybe not very far, but just a little bit could make a difference.
What you said is actually so interesting, because that means that, say, what we faced a couple of years ago, a stressful situation, it can be stored, I would say, in our mind, and then it can come up years later, right? Because you said hormonal changes as well. So I want to understand, how is that connected? Like, do our hormonal changes also affect our stress levels or anxiety levels eventually?
Yeah, and it goes both ways.
Yeah.
Right, again, back to the complexity of it, is that everything goes both ways. Yeah, and everything goes all ways. It's like the spider web, you know. And with our hormones, so when the stress chemicals and hormones like cortisol, and when that's kind of shot up again, especially in a chronic sense, when it's more long term, and the body is just basically not being able to regulate back to homeostasis. What that does is, it, like I said, maybe it causes inflammation, and one brain chemical or hormone impacts many others, and they'll impact many others, etc. Right? So of course, even your reproductive system might get affected, right? And the incidence of things like polycystic ovarian syndrome or disorder we're just hearing of it more, and yes, maybe it is being diagnosed more because of the awareness around it, but it is also occurring more. Yeah. And stress is one of the very real reasons. Yeah. Unfortunately, I have seen so many people just being told, lose weight, that's a solution. And when they come and tell me this, it's so heartbreaking, because I'm not saying that might not be the solution, but there's so much behind it, right? When you have chronic stress, you're going to find it harder to lose weight as well, because you're, inflammation again, right? So when medical professionals say things like this, I think it's a bit more damaging.
Yeah.
Yeah. And even when they come to psychologists, when the clients come to us and we're like, look, we understand there's more to it. It's not just that simple. It is hard to kind of digest for them, because they're like, but the doctor said this. I'm like, yes, I get it, but they're also flawed human beings.
Right.
Yeah. And there's a lot we don't know about these conditions as well, right? And sometimes even things like, in extreme cases, things like unexplained infertility or just other reproductive problems could also be stress related. Yeah. Stress also does impact our libido or our sex drive. Yeah. So again, that could also contribute a little bit to that. But also in general, and that might be another red flag I forgot to mention back then.
And again, coming to another very common problem that a lot of people face but don't understand why they face it, is that through the day we're somewhat fine, but the moment we go to sleep and the lights are off, that is when the overthinking starts, the stress level starts. We start remembering everything bad that time.
Yeah.
Why does that happen? And then people lose their sleep for that.
Yeah. That's part of the stored question that you were asking me, right? Like, you might find ways of distracting yourself from the stress and stressors through the day, but what is your go-to at night? Are you literally then doom scrolling until your phone falls on your face and you fall asleep?
Yeah.
Right? Or are you watching a series until the same thing happens, right? Or are you then stuck with all these thoughts which you have ignored in the day, right? And they're there, right? That's the problem. You can't just ignore your way out of it, unfortunately. And they have to be looked at, right? So that means we have to then do something about the stress, right? Sometimes that might look like, stepping away from stress if you can, right? But like you said, most cases we might not be able to do that. Yeah. So then what, right? So basically, anything it takes to help your body to regulate back to its homeostasis, right? Back to that state at which it is able to rest, right? And not rest as in sleep, but just like regular. Yeah. So I think through this filming of our episode, our stress level is going to be slightly increased. Maybe not a lot, because you do this often and you do it well. And I was so excited to do this, so I'm just like that little bit up as well. And okay, but after this, it's gonna go back, and we're gonna go back. Maybe I have maybe relaxing evening plans, so I know my stress level is gonna regulate again. I don't know what you have, but possibly the similar thing, and that's great. Yeah, but if we don't, then what? Yeah, so we're then going to have to introduce practices that help us to regulate. Yeah, and I know that sounds like just one more thing to do. Yeah, but if you don't do it, everything we talked about until now could possibly take over. Yeah. So different ways of dealing with stress. Yeah. Of course, therapy can help. What we do in therapy more cognitively and also somatically. There's a lot of other somatic body approaches that we do in therapy as well. So those could help. But also more physiological work on your own. And that could be just as simple as like breathing, meditation, moving your body, right? And moving your body doesn't always mean go rough it out at the gym for an hour, right? It could simply mean stretching before bed. Yeah. I remember a few years ago, I had this lovely routine before bed, and I'd be on bed stretching, right? So I wasn't doing like a yoga mat situation in workout clothes. Absolutely not. I was all done. I was all relaxed, and it was just before bed. And I would do like my little Sudokus before, because I still like that. I felt like that was a nice break and disconnect from everything else in the day, right? And it eventually became like signals for my brain and body to unwind, relax, and then rest. Yeah. And when I did that, it was a big shift. I felt like I could really fall asleep easily. My sleep was more peaceful in a sense, like not disturbed. Didn't feel like I was moving about too much in the night. It was great. Yeah. Unfortunately, I that kind of forgot to be consistent with that, or had a hard time doing that for some reasons. And you can see the difference. Yeah. And this conversation is now reminding me to start that again. Yeah, so maybe I'll do that. But that's good, right? So moving your body could just be as simple as that. Sometimes, yes, we do need more high intensity stuff, but not before bed. You can do that in the daytime, right? Morning, afternoon, evening, great times to do that. And moving your body also helps regulate, all those hormones and brain chemicals that we were talking about. The feel-good hormones, the ones that take over, usually which take over after. So when we leave from here, we'll be relaxed. Those feel-good hormones kind of take over. The ones that rest and regulate take over, and they're allowed to function. But when we're in chronic stress, we need to force them to function.
Yeah.
And movement might be one of the ways. Yeah. Any other things you find relaxing? Things like hobbies, interests, and, usually people are like, oh, I can't afford taking up a new hobby. And you don't need to do one of those fancy things that you see online or on social media. You just, like I said, I have my Sudoku book at home. Yeah, and it's just as simple as that. It might be reading, it might be anything. Making sure you're eating right. Yeah, and by right, I don't mean you have to go on a diet or, eat only healthy or, no, just like simple basic things. I think we all know what food will help our bodies and what will harm our bodies. And it's just about making those difficult choices. Yeah. And again, why? Because, it's always easier to make those easier ones that we talked about before. But it would again be worth it for us to make those difficult choices.
But now, if there is one particular thing or exercise that people can actually do before they go to sleep so that they don't overthink or have those really harsh thoughts, what can that be? Because I want to know. So,
I feel like this question is hinting at, give me one thing to do that's going to solve my stress, right? And yes, though the internet and social media is full of those,
yeah.
they enrage me when I see this. Yeah. Because how can so many things be cured by doing one thing? Yeah. It's not like popping a pill.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, like we were saying, it's about creating that system of support for yourself through various things, that help your body to relax, de-stress, right? Body and mind. Yeah. So, yes, you could perhaps create a good sleep environment. You could avoid your caffeine, avoid your social media, etc., etc. And you'll find all these tips everywhere. But what have you also done through the day, through the week, through the month? Yeah. It's like saying, I had a salad today. Why haven't I lost weight?
Yeah.
It's that kind of thing, right? Oh, eat well, but not on one day. So it's that kind of thing that you need to take care of the multitude of things that can support you. Yes. So, yes, we do need to ensure we get good sleep, enough sleep, and there's a lot of things you can do for that. It's important that we nourish ourselves well. There's a lot of things to do for that. It's important to support ourselves socially. There's a lot we can do for that, whether it's friends, family, therapy, etc. Yeah. There's movement. There's a lot of things to do for that. There's a lot of like self-help things that you can do for yourself, just in general, in a variety of things. There's what else is that? So much more, right? But there's all of it, right? And I'm not saying do everything every day. Okay, that would be unrealistic. We live really hectic lives, yeah. But we need to figure out how to involve all of these things in our lives to make sure that we're allowing environments of rest for our brain and body.
Yeah. And also, genetically, very naturally, our ancestors, they had to be in survival mode, talking about, say, just the survival mode bit of our brains. They had to be in survival mode just because they had to survive.
Yeah.
But now what has happened is that our environment is maybe not the same, but our mind sometimes still for a lot of people is in survival mode. But our environment is nothing like what it was before. So why is it that some people to this day stay in survival mode? What it is for people that don't even know that they might be in survival mode. Why do they stay in that? And then the other part is then how do we overcome it?
Yeah. So, I mean, survival mode is not like a diagnosis, but it's a way we describe this experience, which is very similar to the one we talk about when we say chronic stress. Yeah. So when it's just that heightened level of stress and it's constantly there, or it's there very frequently, it's not giving enough breaks for the body to recuperate. Yeah. That's the kind of term that we use colloquially. Our ancestors, and I frequently use this example in my therapy sessions, is to explain our stress response. Is, say, back in the time we were living in, say, like jungles and forests in our little huts, or, that kind of setup. And, say you've had your afternoon meal and you're resting in your hut or outside, and suddenly you hear some noise. Yeah. Now, imagine if our ancestors couldn't be bothered.
Yeah.
They're like, okay, it's noise, it's fine.
Yeah.
Yeah. And mind you, of course, they developed mechanisms to identify different kinds of sound to recognize whether there is a threat or whether it's not, or whether it needs to be investigated. And then they would respond appropriately. So if they realize, wait, this sounds like there might be an animal outside, they'd get up to go check, and if there was a problem, they'd do something to solve it, right? So if there was a wild animal, maybe they had to run, maybe they had to hide, maybe they had to kill, right? Maybe they had to fight. those were their options. And that's what fight or flight refers to, right? So either I fight, right, to neutralize my threat, or I flight, to run away from the threat, essentially. Again, the goal being survival. Yeah, therefore, survival mode, that's where it comes from. But eventually, this threat would get neutralized, right? Either you'd outrun the animal, either you'd kill the animal, or you'd die. Then it's not a problem. But for the ones that did survive, that's what they learned, that, okay, now it's done. Now we're safe, right? So maybe we return to home base, or we set up new home base, whatever. Yeah. And then our body's allowed to relax again, because our body hasn't evolved quick enough to deal with all these stressors of new daily life.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
And you're talking about somewhere rewiring the brain, right? Now, does our brain just, I'm sure it doesn't, because that's why a lot of people are so stressed all the time. Some people are naturally able to cope with it, and some really aren't. Sure. So why is that for some people, the rewiring doesn't happen, say, naturally, as compared to people for whom it does?
Yeah.
And if it doesn't, where do they start? Because I know you said there isn't like 1, 2, 3 things that we can do, but people need to know where they can really start.
Yeah, I get it. So, rewiring question, always so interesting, right? So, yes, of course, we evolve, we rewire, we're more resilient than ever. And that's, human superpowers, I'd say, that we're able to do all of this. But rewiring of our brain and, becoming more resilient requires certain conditions, right? Under constant stress, it's like this, right? Say you want to work on your physique and strength, and you have a gym program, and you're doing your exercising, and you're doing your running, you're doing your healthy eating, you're doing your resting, etc. Great. Yeah, that's going to help you. You're probably going to get stronger. You probably get where you want to be. But what if you just spend like 4-6 hours at the gym every single day doing cardio and weights and everything every day, basically? Do you think that will help?
It'll burn you out also, no? 4 hours a day.
Exactly. Your body is going to give up.
Yeah.
You can't do that. Yeah, that's not going to make you stronger. That's going to injure you. That's the thing, right? You haven't created the correct conditions to allow yourself to get stronger, even from a mental cognitive perspective, right? So yes, it requires exercise, essentially. So yes, dealing with stress could help you get better at dealing with more stress, right? And coping with the stress. But creating those conditions will help you. Yeah.
Okay.
If you just let that go and be like, I'm going to rough it out, and, I'm going to just, deal with it, and it being just stress and stressors. No, you're not. You're going to get burnt out. Yeah. For some time you'll be able to. And that's, again, good human capacity. But why not make it more sustainable? Yeah. So yes, you see your stressors coming, you say, okay, I'm going to get better at dealing with them. Okay, create the environment.
Yeah.
Get your food and nourishment in check, your sleep in check, your movement in check, everything, all of that, your socials, make sure you're not doing things that harm yourself. Yeah, make sure you're not overdoing it. And to the extent possible, of course, we have to be realistic, given that sometimes we, do have to do certain things that we know might tire us and exhaust us. But then fill up your cup again, right? It's that analogy that you can't pour from an empty cup. Yeah, and don't wait for it to get empty before you decide, okay, now I need to fill it up again.
And therapy is, of course, it exists. It is a very good option for people who firstly aren't able to understand their emotions, where they come from. But a lot of people, because of, say, their familial environment, they cannot choose to go for therapy, right? There is sort of a stereotype with it, and people, even if they want to, they can't.
Yeah.
And they aren't able to understand how to deal with their emotions. So if they were to start, say, on their own, I know maybe it won't help as much as, say, going to a therapist can, but even if it helps a little more, but how should they start? How can they start? I'm sure every emotion needs to be worked on differently, but in a more generic sense, what can they do?
Yeah, aside from, like we said, creating that nice supportive environment for yourself, there is, luckily, we live in an age where there is a lot of information available to use for yourself. And I come across a lot of good content also, right? So aside from my rage on the unhelpful content, there is good content, but you need to be able to tell the good from the bad. And I would suggest go with things that have research backing. So if someone is saying research says da 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 da, do not believe it, right? But if they have cited names of researchers, when it was published, where it was published, linked to the article if possible, believe that. There's also a lot of information in terms of how you can use psychotherapies for yourself, right? Like apply them to ourselves. So REBT, for example, yes, of course, so much more helpful if you come for therapy, but you could very well use a lot of the REBT principles that, we've talked about some of them, and you use them in your daily life and make it more like a philosophical understanding, right? You can read about it, you can watch videos about it, you can attend. There's a lot of wonderful REBT therapists that do like live demonstration sessions. You can attend, you can ask questions. And, if you tell someone you're listening to a podcast, you're attending a workshop or a lecture, people might not question you as compared to, like you're saying, if you say you're going to therapy. So there's a lot of resources available there. Access them. And, at the end of the day, whether you're going to therapy or not, hopefully you do, but even if you're not, and even if you are, what you take from there and use yourself is what's going to make the biggest difference. Yeah. Even if you're the most regular client in therapy, so you're going once a week, it's been a year and you're not seeing changes. Yeah, there could be a lot of factors why that might happen, but it might be that you're not using that.
Yeah.
You're not applying that in your own life. You're not exercising those things. Yeah. It's like you're watching the workout videos, but you're not working out.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's like that. Yeah. So the more you use and apply for yourself, of course, it's going to make a big difference, right? And if you do so consistently, I think consistency being the key word in all that we've spoken about right now. And yes, it's hard. It's incredibly hard. It's probably the hardest thing to do in our very busy lives. But we do have to create that for ourselves. Yeah, and that's what's going to sustain us the longest.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And coming to, again, another probably a deeper side effect of chronic stress, which is brain fog. I want to understand what brain fog means because a lot of people might face it. We touched upon a little bit, I think, before.
Yeah.
But let's help the audience understand what brain fog is. How do we understand what we're going through as brain fog, and why is it so bad for us?
Back to those wonderful cocktail of brain chemicals and hormones that, dance about in our brains. When we have the chronic stress, and, it's causing either inflammation, it's impacting other brain chemicals as well. Obviously that affects the brain's functioning, but research has shown, if you want, I'll send you references for this.
We'll attach it in the description.
We'll attach it, that the actual brain structures also show physiological changes. So areas like our prefrontal cortex, which is involved in like decision making and things like that, like, preventing us from doing things which we know are not great. Those shrink in size. The other kind of emotional centers kind of, inflame or grow in size. Other memory related centers also shrink in size. So there are literal physiological changes that are occurring as a result of chronic stress. Yeah. So when people say, I lose my chain of thought, or, I'm unable to focus or concentrate, or you've told me so many things, but I have no idea what they are. Like I was really trying to listen, but it's an absolute blur for me. I couldn't repeat a single one of them back to you, And that's kind of what people term as brain fog. Yeah. It might also be coupled with like disinterest, disengagement. Yeah. But it's more of those symptoms relating to the memory, the concentration, the focus. It's more of that. And like I said, there's actual changes that happen in the brain. So no, of course, you're going to experience them in this way.
How is it bad for our body?
Our bodies have a certain size, like proportions for certain reasons, right? It's how we've evolved because it's most functional, it's adapted, right? So has our brains, right? Like before, you know, like monkeys, their faces look quite different from us, like their brains look different from us. And we've evolved in this way, like our prefrontal cortex, the one with decision making, etc. That's much, much larger than monkeys who have more of, you know, if you've seen like sloping foreheads, because theirs is not that developed. So our brains develop to best function. Yeah. Now, if they're changing because of chronic stress, they're not going to function optimally. But also physiological distress, right? And behavioral distress. Yeah, because if my inhibition is not as strong as it was, I'm going to behave in ways that might not be very socially acceptable or might be socially questionable.
Yeah.
That's going to then impact my social functioning, which is going to lead to more stress. Guess what stress does? It's going to affect your brain. Do you see those cycles kind of?
Cycle. Yeah.
Everything's a cycle. Yeah. That's why it's so complex. Everything's interconnected.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I think the only thing I'm realizing is that no matter what, in order to change that, we need to be consistent. It's hard, but we must keep on probably doing these exercises, go to the therapist, and work on our mind maybe the same way that we would choose to work on our bodies, if at all we choose that, right?
Yeah. Preferably do both. All of those things. But like I said, we've got to do it realistically. Yeah. I think that's the takeaway, consistently and realistically. Yeah. We don't want to go into like, oh, just do this or just do that. And doesn't work.
And if I were to sort of sum up, you know, everything that we've spoken about and with your experience as well, what do you think is one thing that you truly sort of have used in your own life from a psychological, a mental health perspective that you think if people, and not just people who are chronically stressed, but in general people can use so that they can prevent things from happening? Again, as we said, it's not one particular thing, but just on a general.
No, I get where your question is coming from. That's all right. So, I think what I use personally is that I use a lot of REBT philosophy in my own life, as in I apply it to myself and my life as frequently as possible. Sometimes it kind of, you know, slips my mind as well. And then I'm like, oh, wait, I should have just, you know, gone back to the REBT. But that's taken time and consistency, right? I've been practicing for now, more than 7 years. And I've been, you know, every day I'm talking to clients about it. So of course it's easier to make it part of my daily life, but it's still tough, right? It was a very effortful challenge initially. But it does become more natural, slowly and steadily. Not fully, still requires effort even after 7 years. But it does become easier to comprehend, apply, use, and it is very effective as one of the therapies. So, and you don't have to choose REBT. It's just one possible therapy amongst many effective ones. So, you know, see what you relate to, go with it. But you need to use it. Like, you know, like we said before, like I can't just look at the video and be like, okay, now I know it. But can I apply it in my daily life? And this is a challenge that I think even clients face sometimes is, you know, they feel like, oh, we talked about it, I've done the homework. And they feel like, oh, even doing the homework is going to be good enough. But, oh, wait, that's only part of the process now. Let's apply it, like, you know, properly use it in my daily life. So I think that's really important, is to really engage with what you know. And the consistency helps with that. And, whatever you're going to take away from this episode as well for the viewers, I think it's important for them to be able to then apply it, right? It's not just the knowledge that counts, but am I doing all those things to create that supportive environment for myself consistently? Am I doing it in impactful ways? Yeah. I think that's going to be the most, the smallest, most frequent changes are going to have the biggest effects.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That is so well said. And you kind of summed up the episode as well a little bit. And this was such a wholesome conversation. We spoke about a very deep issue, but yet I think tried to sort of tell the audience there's light at the end of the tunnel and you can always get better. And I learned so much. And thank you so, so, so much for coming today.
It's such a pleasure. It's been a real pleasure to be here and to have this conversation with you. Thank you for having me.